The little girl called Astrid begins episode 1 of Equinox as she hears distant rumbling outside and hurries out to catch a glimpse of the graduation bus. On board is her sister Ida, who certainly isn't in the cheering mood. She heads inside and winds up in a heated argument with her mother, Lene. There's fragments of something bigger here, but as Astrid listens from the doorway, she can't make out the crux of the issue. With a big send-off from the town, Astrid's father gives Ida some sound words of advice before encouraging her to go. Lene meanwhile struggles to let her go. Still, Ida gets on the bus and begins drinking as the bus takes off. That evening, Astrid is awoken by flashing lights outside as police arrive and confirm the worst. Ida has gone missing along with all the other students on board the bus. The driver is still very much with us but passed out. Speaking of which, Astrid faints and falls down the stairs when she hears tumbling down so hard that we snap back to the present. 20 years have passed, and Astrid is still haunted by the disappearance of her sister. She happens to be the host for a local radio station too, but takes time out to pick her kid up from school. Astrid's past makes it difficult to form relationships, and despite not being with her partner David for a year, she clearly has conflicted feelings about him. She expresses jealousy when he mentions seeing someone else, and then steps forward to try and kiss him. It's very obvious this girl is suffering. That evening Astrid receives a strange call while working on her radio show. There's another reality. A different reality behind the one we're in. The garbled voice calls, "It's me, Jacob Skipper." I know why she disappeared. The voice continues as Astrid realizes this somehow links to her sister going missing in the past. It clearly rattles Astrid, who begins acting erratically and desperate to find out what this means. Back home, she begins sifting through her sister's belongings, paying special attention to a silver coin mentioned on the call. Accompanying that coin is a newspaper clipping with names of 3 graduates who turned up again after initially going missing on board that bus. Jacob Skipper, Amelia Geisler and Faki Gravison. 21 graduates, including Ida, are still missing. Astrid travels back to Copenhagen and begins investigating this properly. This brings her to the address held for Jacob Skipper, but the shop is actually owned by his brother, Matthias. Once there, he talks to Astrid in the back. Jacob's using this property as his care address as Matthias calls him a seeker. She doesn't press on this and notices that his replies are cagey, to say the least. Is he hiding something? Well, both Amelia and Faki haven't been heard from in 8 years, and Astrid eventually leaves, none the wiser to what's really going on here. That brings Astrid back home with her mum and dad, confirming to them what she's looking to do. Dennis is adamant that the case is closed and tells Astrid to stop. Getting nowhere with her parents, Astrid turns her attention to the reporter who wrote this newspaper headline, Harold Birch. He's adamant that one of the trio who returned have something to do with the disappearances. This man was taken off the case for losing track and becoming obsessed, but Harold simply shrugs it off, telling Astrid he just wants to solve the case. Grabbing a VHS tape, he shows off interviews with Jacob and the others. "We drove, the truck stopped, and then the others were gone," Jacob says defiantly. He sounds very convinced by what happened, but with no marks or scratches, Harold is convinced he was forced to lie by someone. Amelia Geisler is also on the tape, pleading innocent and seemingly repentant for her part in all this. Faki sports a nasty cut across his cheek and confirms that Jacob was the one who persuaded them to do something significant. Faki also confirms there were just the 4 of them, hinting that Ida didn't disappear at the same time as the bus. When Faki begins rambling about an island in Jacob's book, things become incoherent. Neither of these things seem to point anywhere substantial, especially not the island, which Harold confirms he investigated and found nothing. Astrid next visits Amelia's father, Lars Lawton, who happens to be gambling down at Tove's bar. He confirms Amelia is not there and acts completely standoffish with her. In this town of secrets, Astrid is certain someone is hiding something. In the morning, she looks across her apartment block and sees someone tumbling over the edge to their death below. As she screams and heads outside, there's nothing there, and it seems to be just a frightening vision she's experienced. It's clear these images are linked to Astrid's frazzled psyche, but quite how remains to be seen. That evening Matthias calls, frantically asking exactly what Jacob said when he rung her. In the midst of all this, he confirms Jacob's dead and jumped off a rooftop. Only, this seems to hint at Astrid having the gift of foresight. As the episode closes out, Astrid heads into the bathroom and sees the frightening image of a shadowy figure walking toward her. When she flicks the lights on, it disappears. We begin episode 2 of Equinox with Astrid talking to Dennis about Ida's belongings. None of the family have her things now, and Dennis advises against seeing her estranged mother, Lene. According to Dennis, she's manipulative and he's loath to the idea of her digging up the past. But dig up the past she does, especially when it comes to Ida. Astrid arrives at Lene's house, but she's erratic to say the least. Her curtains are drawn, the place is a cluttered mess, and numerous smiling paintings of Ida show a woman obsessed and unable to move past what's happened. Lene reaches out to hold Astrid's hand at one point, but her daughter pulls away, uneasy at her mother's show of affection. It's clear there's a lot of unresolved tension here, and Lene does her best to strike common ground surrounding their kids. Finding an opportune time to slip away, Astrid searches Ida's room, allowing some slick back and forth cuts to intersect together and point toward one key character in Ida's past, her teacher, Henrik. As we soon find out though, there's apparently no record of Henrik at the school. Astrid takes time out from her investigation to attend Jacob's funeral. While Matthias reads a few statements about his brother, a woman speaks up and claims Jacob was a murderer. Astrid looks around and notices a shifty guy standing by the doorway. This isn't an isolated incident though, and given he was at Tove's bar, the school, and now at Jacob's funeral, Astrid senses he may be connected in some way. However, she fails to find him outside. During flashbacks, we see Ida head off to school. There, she meets Amelia, Jacob and Hamm. They're all preparing for an upcoming party and peer pressure Ida into heading out with them to use Jacob's Ouija board. Ida's estranged relationship with her mom continues to drive a wedge between them, especially when Lene berates Ida for heading home late. Given what's going on with their parents, Ida promises Astrid that she'll always have her to rely on. That evening, Ida heads out with Amelia, Jacob and Faki, where they meet in the graveyard and check different gravestones. Jacob claims it's a big mystery and promises to tell them what it all means in due time. He brandishes a book, one that was quoted as Jacob's book last episode, and begins reciting strange scripture. Alongside this is also a map that points toward an island and a possible ritual surrounding Equinox. Later that evening, Jacob makes a move on Ida and even sleeps with her too. This happened to be Ida's first time, and while they lie in bed together, he admits that he likes her. Cutting back to the present again, Astrid continues to investigate, and that takes her to the bus driver, Torben Brink. As we soon see, he is not of sane mind, but immediately asks Astrid if she wants to play die with her after telling her he knows who she is. Recording their conversation, she asks about the bus and what happened that fateful day. With photos in hand, he immediately changes his expression and grabs her face. The girl is gone. As he begins humming My Bonnie Lies Over the Ocean, the same song Astrid sung at the start of episode 1, he eventually convulses on the floor. Astrid quickly phones an ambulance, but while waiting, notices he's circled Henrik's face in black pen. What could this mean? We begin episode 3 of Equinox in the past, with Lene talking to Astrid about her nightmares and the horrible images she's been seeing. She claims that the monsters want to lock her up like Ida and the others. After promising to tell her mother everything she sees, Lene begins singing My Bonnie, as Astrid winds up back in that strange orange glowing wood we've been seeing fragments of across the season so far. Dennis and Lene continue to argue, this time surrounding Astrid, and whether to get a psychologist involved to help her work through her problems. Lene, however, doesn't see this as the solution. A bit further back than that, more flashbacks showcase Jacob and Ida's relationship in more detail. Although Lene claims Jacob took advantage of her, they seem happy together. They even sort of agree to become a couple. In the morning, the group prepare to head off on their road trip to the island. On the way, they stop and hear more from Jacob's ominous warnings from his book, including 6 different statements chosen by rolling a die. Ida rolls a 1, which tells her she'll be sacrificed. This certainly rattles the girl, who struggles to concentrate in the wake of seeing the island they're due to travel across to. With a rowing boat, they head across and immediately get wrapped up in what's going on. Back home, Astrid is hypnotized by Lean's friend Jutta, who tries to guide her through the labyrinth of the orange forest. She encourages the young girl to walk on until she suddenly begins breathing heavily. She panics as she sees a frightening silhouette of a fawn stalking toward her. Dennis races in the room and snatches up Astrid mid-trance, taking her daughter away. Lean is convinced Astrid has seen Ida and that she's still alive. On the island, Jacob leads the others through the woods until they find the cult operating in the distance. Both Faki and Ida are hesitant to begin with, but Jacob eventually convinces them to join in. Back in the present, Astrid begins looking up iconography, in particular the symbol on the gravestones, and where it originates from. It turns out the symbol has roots back to ancient pagan times from a cult that have roots in Denmark. The circle represents life. That life points back to spring equinox. There's also hints of equinox stones, and apparently children conceived on this day are born with superpowers. However, it's hard to distinguish what's fantasy and what's real. One thing's for sure, this cult looks like it could have a hand in Ida's disappearance. Back home, Astrid questions Dennis over who Ida's teacher was. Given he doesn't exist in the school records, Dennis's vague answers do absolutely nothing to help either. Thankfully, Lean is more open. She claims Henrik was nasty and in charge of everything. He was the one pulling the strings, and when the trio of survivors popped up, Henrik went off the grid and ran away. Astrid continues her search, following the country lanes to a secluded quaint cottage where Henrik lives. Henrik is wary at her arrival, but agrees to hear her out for now. Henrik admits he was close to Jacob but didn't know about his funeral. He outright confirms he's not involved in what happened as Astrid continues to press him for information. Getting nowhere, Astrid is left with more questions than answers. That night the pair sit at a campfire where Henrik tells her she's asking the wrong questions. He doesn't elaborate much more than that, but does confirm that she needs to continue her journey and investigate further. In the morning, Astrid once again sees that strange man who's been popping up all over town. Once again though, Astrid's search is fruitless. Back on the bus though, she finds a package on the seat she was sitting at. "Meet me at Bakken on Friday at 2 p.m. it reads. Alongside that is a tape player. A tape player holding the same music Jacob and Faki were listening to in the past. As the episode closes out, we cut back to the island one final time, as Ida's brought forward and handed an egg. The other girls are given one too, as the leader claims a star has been found. Ida's egg stands up on its end, and she's shown a menacing hooded figure that looks like a cross between Scarecrow and that fawn we've been. We begin episode 4 of Equinox right at the heart of this ritual involving Ida in the past. The cultists chant eerily as Ida is forced to crack her egg and consume its insides. Breathing heavily, Ida looks up at the sky as this cultist smears her face in white facepant. Jacob immediately gets into the swing of things too, with a maddening look in his eyes. The others try in vain to get through to him, as Ida is made the centerpiece of this uneasy ritual. As night consumes the world, Faki steps up alongside Ida, who tells him to do it. She strips down naked and awaits what's to come next. Back in the present, Astrid shows up at the meeting spot and is immediately blindsided by the man who's been following her. Upon closer inspection, it turns out he's actually Faki. He beckons her to follow as they walk through the eerily abandoned amusement park together. He brings her to his hideout where Faki discusses the number 21 and how the song on the tape player is the most important part of this puzzle. Ida's a star. He bellows as Faki mentions how Ida drank the egg before everything in the book started to come true, including her sister's sacrifice. Jacob was punished, Amelia lost, and Faki himself is suffering. As Astrid presses for answers, he explains what happened with Ida up to the point we've seen before of her being stripped down naked. He points back at the driver, Torben, who apparently has the answers she seeks. Just before she leaves, Faki tells her to listen to the song backwards and forwards. Astrid heads back to the hospital where Torben is in a bad way. However, Doris arrives and tells Astrid to leave, especially given Torben seems to be brain dead now. Doris shakes her head, telling Astrid she's to blame for what's happened to him. Defeated, Astrid heads home where Lene happens to be sitting in her bedroom. Astrid confronts her about Ida and how she knew something would happen to her sister. This is especially true given the argument they had prior to Ida leaving on graduation day. Astrid loses her temper, but Lene sees through her frustrated facade to realize her daughter is starting to experience visions again. "You have a special gift," Lene tells her, reinforcing that bond she has with Ida. In Ida's room, Astrid finds that strange bird necklace her sister wore at the ritual inside a wooden egg. That's certainly not a coincidence. Anyway, Astrid deliberates over Faki's words, especially as she recorded their entire conversation. The number 21 is a repeated theme here, but also 22 and 23 too. As Astrid lays out all of her clues out on the floor, the pattern soon becomes clear. 21 students went missing. Jacob died on the 22nd December. On March 21st the students were on the island during Equinox. June 21st they disappeared, and around all these solstice dates is one crucial clue: the autumn solstice, which takes place on the 23rd September. That date just so happens to be Astrid's birthday. As she remembers the backwards and forwards clue from Faki, Astrid plays the tape recorder again, but this time plays it backwards. A ghostly voice rings through, telling her she's next. When Dennis shows up, Astrid feeds back to him everything she's learned so far. As Astrid begins sobbing, Dennis holds his daughter and tells her to let it go, as this Astara is just a fantasy. A distraught Astrid phones home and decides to leave. It's clear she sees echoes of Lene's madness in her. Only, on the way she receives a call from Matthias, who reveals there's a letter from Jacob for her. It was sent from Romania to the place Jacob died. Opening the letter with trembling hands, Astrid leaves the ominous note which reads, "Astara flows in the blood as water flows in the river." It's something that certainly rattles her, as Astrid struggles to focus on the plane home. In the past, Dennis and Lene take young Astrid to the doctors, believing something is wrong with her after the visions and fainting. However, the doctor finds nothing. As Astrid sits with puzzle pieces in her hand, another vision takes hold as she sees that strange fawn from before grab her. Only, this happens to be Dennis, who shakes her awake and lies with her back in hospital again. Further back through time, the ritual continues as a naked Ida sits atop the stone pedestal and awaits her fate. That fate comes from the makeshift fawn, the one wearing a scarecrow-esque mask we saw before. As the episode closes out, an erratic Faki steps out in front of a subway train and sacrifices himself. When he does, Torben awakens from his comatose state. Episode 5 of Equinox begins with Astrid answering David's messages, deciding against heading back home after all. Instead, she's gone to Marrakech and followed the address Jacob sent his letter from. Once there though, she finds Amelia, who happens to be very much alive and seemingly at peace. There's some serious Midsummer vibes as Astrid is brought into this cult. Apparently Amelia cast off her old name a long time ago, and now she's known as Sibylle. Astrid immediately asks about Jacob, but as she does, strange whispering casts her gaze toward an ominous blue door alongside the house. Astrid mentions the call Jacob made prior to his death, and shows her the ripped-out page about Astara from his book. It's clear Amelia is hiding something, but she remains tight-lipped for now. Instead, she encourages Astrid to head up to the top of their wooden tower to watch the sunset. As it descends behind the rolling hills on the horizon, she rings a bell as a tribute to the sunlight. Astrid sleeps there that night but awakens, drawn to the strange door by fragmented, incoherent whispers. She chips away at the yellow paint on the front and finds the familiar pattern of the solstice dates. She's distracted by Amelia screaming though, as Astrid wonders what this all means. Night paves way to morning as Astrid once again follows the ominous whispers to the strange room. Inside she finds a mirror, but reflected back is her own younger self and the fawn we've seen before. Clearly not of sane mind, adult Astrid headbutts the mirror. In doing so, she reveals a strange booklet hidden behind the glass. Jacob's book. With this in hand, she approaches Amelia and demands answers. Amelia admits that nothing is random, and everything inside that strange book has come true. This is, of course, exactly the same thing Faki told us last episode too. Amelia tells her that Equinox repeats itself every 21 years, and unfortunately everything is about to begin again. As Astara runs in the blood, Amelia tells Astrid she needs to speak to her mother about this as she has more answers. When she leaves, Astrid realizes that Ida is Astara. At the airport, David is there and drives Astrid home. Unfortunately, he's not actually taking her home. Instead, he's intending to take her somewhere to get professional help. On the road, she tries to swerve the car but wakes up in a psychiatric hospital. In the past, a young Astrid hears a story about Astara told through shadow puppets. When her father leaves her for the night, Astrid befriends a young boy who also happens to be there too. He's been hearing voices and takes a shining to Astrid, telling her not to take her medicine. Astrid takes his advice and holds off popping pills. This brings back the frightening visions from before, more powerful this time as she calls out for Ida. More flashbacks occur this episode too, this time focusing on Ida. She experiences visions and weird whispers after the ritual. Ida shows up at school, but finds herself shunned by Amelia and the others who don't pay much attention to her. Jacob blanks her too, leaving Ida all alone and unsure where to turn next. Ida's condition continues to worsen as she struggles to concentrate and continues to feel under the weather. After throwing up in the morning, Lean realizes that Ida is actually pregnant. As the girl begins sobbing, Lean tells her she's going to go to Marrakech and she wants Ida to join her. Eventually Ida recovers enough to head into school where she spies Jacob and Amelia having sex in the music room. Distraught, Ida struggles while Henrik notices her under a tunnel hiding out from the rain. He encourages her to head over and talk to him before she heads home. Henrik convinces her to stay and tells her she has a lot to live for. Ida excuses herself to use the bathroom, but in doing so, finds the familiar mask from the ritual. The mask from the man who had sex. Spring equinox is upon us as episode 6 of Equinox begins. We start the episode in the present at the emergency psychiatric hospital. Astrid examines the pages of Jacob's book, and she notices that one page in particular has been torn out. This, of course, is the one Astrid was sent by Jacob. She begins putting everything together and slips out the ward, walking away. Wait, what? How did she get out without anyone seeing her? Anyway, Astrid heads back to see Lean and asks outright whether she and Ida are even sisters. Lean brushes aside these claims and tells her that those rumors were created by Dennis and aren't true. When Astrid accidentally smashes a framed photograph, however, she notices the date reading as 22nd August 1989. It's that number again, and now the truth comes spilling out. It turns out Astrid is not their child, and both she and Ida are daughters of Equinox. This causes her to immediately spin out of control, coming to the realization that her whole life has been a lie. The cycle repeats. While Astrid began this episode in the psychiatric ward, during flashbacks we see a young Astrid incarcerated as the doctors there worry about her development. In particular, her continued mentions of a star are worrying, and believe it's been made worse by her tying this in with Ida's disappearance. The doctor even encourages Dennis and Lean not to entertain or believe her stories. While Dennis obliges, Lean meanwhile tells her daughter in secret that there's nothing wrong with her. Lean implores Astrid to bring Ida back through her visions. She grabs her daughter's face, pleading with her to head inside the cave and save a trapped Ida. Astrid is afraid and eventually refuses, despite the constant pressure from her mother. Dennis is understandably furious when he finds out what happened. He rings Lean and tells her he's going to file for full custody of Astrid. Lean turns her attention to Ida instead. After her daughter has a shower, blood starts trickling down Ida's leg. Lean is enraged, especially given it means she's miscarried her child. We've now caught up to graduation day as festive music swells, and the bus takes off to celebrate the students making it through high school. Faki speaks to Ida in the midst of all this, and admits he's been stupid. He tells her they shouldn't have gone to the island and hurries away. Just before Torben drives off, an altercation takes place between Henrik and Lean. Now the moments at the start of episode 1 make more sense. Lean tells Ida not to get on the bus as she's in danger. It turns out Lean promised to give Ida up when she was 18 as part of a pact with Henrik and his cult. Unable to give up her daughter, Lean changed the terms to give up Ida's firstborn, the child she miscarried. Unfortunately, because of this, he is coming after her. That he, while not outright mentioned, is presumably Henrik. Jacob backs up Henrik's shadiness as he confirms he stole the grimoire originally from his teacher. Ida refuses to listen to him, though, and eventually walks away. Back in the present, Doris rings and calls Astrid in. Torben has woken up. At the hospital, Astrid finds Torben, who tells her they saw each other in the orange haze. He mentions how he was trapped inside the cave, and so are the kids too. Astrid is presumably the only one who understands. Astrid shows Torben the photo of their school class, who in turn tells her Henrik is not human. He's the signing and wants what he didn't get 21 years ago. This seems to hint toward the child of Equinox, who isn't Ida, but in fact herself. After finding out the truth, Astrid drives off to see Henrik. His house is completely ransacked and presumably unused for a long time too. Believing the answers lie on the island, she takes a rowboat and heads off alone. She trudges along the exact same path the kids did toward the ritual spot. Once there, she finds Henrik standing waiting at the stone pedestal. Holding Jacob's book, she hands it over. Now we see the moments in the past where the bus stopped. Henrik stood in front of the vehicle as Torben slammed on the brakes. An orange glow descended over them all as Jacob awakens and wonders where the rest of the students are. Back in the present, Henrik disappears as Astrid wanders toward the shore. Ida appears before her, and she heads out to embrace her sister in the orange haze. Hand in hand, they head out into the water together as that strange fawn creature watches them. As the episode closes out, the 21 students suddenly show up and begin walking through a theory of last episode. So Equinox ends on a slightly ambiguous cliffhanger to close things out with. It seems like Henrik is our devil incarnate, akin to Randall Flagg from The Stand in some ways. It's also hinted in more than one occasion that Henrik is this fawn we've been seeing through the season. As more of the cult issues comes to the foreground, Lean's pact with Henrik to hand over the children of Equinox explains exactly why he's so vengeful and interested in Ida. However, the show has struggled a little with merging its supernatural elements into the more slow-burn mystery, and many people will undoubtedly find the ending confusing. Despite that, the show does a pretty good job with its cult-centric story, and the atmosphere in this has been fantastic throughout. In fact, the sound design in particular has been very reminiscent of Dark, minus the vocal-driven montages in that German show. So what about that ending then? What happened to the students? Unless I'm missing something, it seems like they were transported across to this strange world, the orange glow which seems to have kept them in holding. It's not initially clear, and even more so given that final shot could have taken place in the past rather than the present. Whether Netflix renewed this one for a second season or not remains to be seen, but for the time being, Equinox delivers a pretty good drama despite its slightly wobbly ending. It's not perfect, and at times has been a little too slow, but there's enough here to enjoy. Equinox feels like a blend of feature film Midsummer and German series Dark. With a mystery encompassing the entire series, revealing flashbacks and light bites of horror, this Danish series certainly has a lot going for it. Equinox demands a fair amount of patience to get to the good stuff though, with an ambiguous ending likely to make or break your experience with this one. The story itself is essentially split between two separate timelines. In 1999, Astrid's sister Ida leaves town on a graduation bus with a class full of students never to be seen again. Including Ida, 21 students in total go missing, with only Amelia, Jacob, and Faki inexplicably surviving whatever happened. Cut forward 20 years and Astrid continues to be haunted by her sister's disappearance. Working at a local radio station, she receives a strange, garbled call. "It's me, Jacob Skipper. I know why she disappeared." This spine-chilling revelation serves as the catalyst for Astrid's investigation as she heads back to Copenhagen and begins digging up what really happened. As Astrid follows the breadcrumb trail, speaking to numerous different witnesses and suspects, faint whispers of occult, satanic demons and a hidden family secret threaten to turn her world upside down. Alongside this methodical investigation are revealing flashbacks that reveal what happened to Ida and a young Astrid, interspersed across the 40 to 50-minute episodes. There's some lovely editing to cut between the two timelines here, smooth tracking shots that seamlessly overlap fades from one scene to the next. These work beautifully as Astrid retraces her sister's footsteps and digs up painful moments she'd rather not return to. There's a couple of light jump scares here too, but mostly it's dressing for the suspenseful and moody score oozing through all 6 episodes. In fact, the music in this show is easily the standout element, leaning into that suspenseful feel dark had in abundance. As mentioned before, Equinox is a real slow burn thriller, and at times perhaps a little too slow. You need to have a good amount of patience with this one, and it's advisory not to binge through this. In fact, Equinox is one of those rare shows where I actually wish Netflix had released one episode a week. You'll undoubtedly have a number of different theories and ideas about what's going on, which are quickly dispelled or reinforced by the next episode. Most of the joy with this show comes from trying to piece together what happened, and I found myself intentionally spacing out these screeners across 2 or 3 days, rather than plowing through in one go. Alongside the narrative work, Danica Curcic really stands out as the tortured and mentally unstable Astrid. Her portrayal of this sister struggling to move past Tida's disappearance is given a lot of depth and complexity, working harmoniously with the aforementioned sound design to keep this one so engrossing. Equinox isn't perfect, though, and its slow pace will certainly turn some people away. You need to be prepared to have some serious patience to get to the good stuff, and in a way it feels quite reminiscent of those research scenes in the American remake of The Ring. If you're invested in the story, you'll persevere, but an ambiguous ending is another roadblock that may put some people off this. Given the show only has 6 episodes, if you're a fan of mysteries or mind-bending suspense, Equinox is definitely worth checking